The federal courthouse in Columbus, Ohio, stood like a fortress beneath a slate-gray March sky, its granite walls a stoic backdrop to the chaos unfolding outside. Inside, Room 4 buzzed with an electric tension that defied the building's somber dignity. The gallery was packed to capacity. Reporters lined the perimeter, their laptops glowing with live feeds. Political aides whispered into phones, their faces tight with strain, and onlookers pressed close, drawn by the promise of a scandal that could topple a political heavyweight. Beyond the courthouse doors, the scene was a maelstrom. News vans clogged Broad Street, their satellite dishes piercing the clouds, while protesters clashed in a cacophony of chants. Jordan exposed, blared one group, waving signs in bold red, countered by Jim fights for us in a sea of stars and stripes. The air thrummed with anticipation, a storm brewing over a trial that threatened to shake Ohio's political core. At the center of this tempest sat Jim Jordan, the fiery U.S. representative from Ohio's 4th Congressional District, known for his relentless conservative advocacy and combative style. At 61, his thinning gray hair was combed neatly, his wiry frame taut in a navy suit, his sharp features set in a defiant scowl that had carried him through years of congressional battles until now. Jordan faced a federal lawsuit accusing him of conspiracy to misuse campaign funds and obstruct justice, tied to an alleged scheme to funnel $3.5 million through a shell company, Buckeye Freedom Fund, to silence critics and bolster his 2024 re-election bid. The charges had surfaced weeks after his latest victory, a triumph now overshadowed by whispers of corruption. Jordan dismissed the case as a leftist smear job, but the stakes were towering and the nation was riveted. The room fell silent as the bailiff's voice cut through the din. All rise for the Honorable Judge Robert Simmons. A broad-shouldered man in his early 60s strode in, his black robe billowing slightly, his salt and pepper hair framing a face etched with quiet authority. Judge Robert Simmons was a Columbus native with a reputation as a judicial titan, his deep voice and steady brown eyes commanding respect across 3 decades on the federal bench. Known for his methodical reasoning and an uncanny ability to unearth truth, Simmons had a history of dismantling flimsy defenses in high-profile cases from corporate malfeasance to political scandals. Today, he carried an air of calm resolve, his gaze sweeping the courtroom before settling briefly on Jordan. Simmons took his seat, adjusting a stack of files with a practiced hand. "This is a court of law, not a wrestling mat," he said, his voice a low rumble that filled the room, a nod to Jordan's past as a collegiate athlete. "I expect evidence, not evasion. Let's get to it." Jordan's scowl flickered, a hint of unease passing through his sharp eyes as he shifted in his seat. Beside him sat Michael Grayson, his defense attorney, a slick, silver-haired lawyer with a knack for turning chaos into opportunity. Across the aisle stood Karen Ellis, the prosecutor, a wiry, intense woman with a relentless drive, her dark suit as sharp as her determination. Ellis had spent months building a case to pin Jordan to the wall, and she was ready to strike. The gallery shifted, a collective breath held as the trial of one of Congress's most combative figures began. Outside, the Ohio wind rattled the windows, but inside, the real tempest was about to ignite. The courtroom's fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow as Karen Ellis rose from her seat, her footsteps echoing faintly on the polished floor. Her opening statement was her chance to strike first, to frame Jim Jordan as a corrupt power broker before the defense could spin a counter-narrative. She faced the 12-jurors, a mix of Columbus locals, from factory workers to teachers, and began, her voice clear and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about trust and betrayal. Jim Jordan, a U.S. Congressman sworn to serve Ohio, conspired to misuse $3.5 million in campaign funds through a shell company, Buckeye Freedom Fund, to silence critics and obstruct a 2023 investigation into his conduct. This wasn't a slip or a clerical error, it was a deliberate scheme to protect his power, and we'll prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt." Ellis paused, letting her words settle. The jurors sat attentive, some nodding faintly, others glancing at Jordan, whose scowl remained fixed but strained. You'll see bank records, hear from witnesses who executed his orders, and review emails that tie Mr. Jordan directly to this conspiracy, she continued. He hid behind his office while breaking the law, and today, he'll face the reckoning he's long avoided. As Ellis sat, Michael Grayson stood, his movements fluid and assured. He adjusted his cufflinks and offered the jury a measured smile, his voice calm and authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard is a story of partisan fabrication designed to smear a dedicated public servant. Jim Jordan has fought for Ohio for nearly 2 decades, standing up for jobs, families, and freedom. He trusted his team to manage campaign finances and political strategy, and if mistakes were made, they weren't his. This lawsuit is a political assassination, a desperate move by opponents who can't beat him at the ballot box or in debate. They'll throw numbers and accusations at you, but they won't prove intent because there is none. Grayson paced slowly, his hands clasped behind him. Jim Jordan is a target, not a criminal. By the end of this trial, you'll see the truth. He's innocent of these baseless charges. The opening statements drew the battle lines. Evidence versus trust, corruption versus conspiracy. The courtroom hummed as reporters tapped out updates. The hashtag Jordan trial surging online, splitting the digital crowd. Some hailed Jordan as a victim of politics. Others branded him a crook finally caught. Ellis called her first witness, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a forensic accountant with a razor-sharp mind for financial trails. Mitchell, a slim woman in her 40s with a tight bun, took the stand, a thick binder of records in hand. Dr. Mitchell, Ellis began, holding up a stack of bank statements. What do these documents reveal? Mitchell adjusted her glasses and spoke evenly. They show $3.5 million transferred from Jordan's campaign accounts to Buckeye Freedom Fund over 8 months in 2023, labeled as consulting services. Buckeye then redirected the funds. $2 million went to cash payments for 3 individuals tied to a 2023 investigation into Jordan, and $1 million covered personal expenses, private flights, a lake house lease linked to his family and associates. The gallery murmured, a wave of surprise rippling through. Ellis pressed on. Could this be a mistake? No, Mitchell said. The transactions were structured to avoid reporting split into smaller amounts, funneled through a shell company with no real operations. It's intentional. Grayson rose for cross-examination, his tone smooth but skeptical. Dr. Mitchell, campaign finance is complex, isn't it? It can be, Mitchell admitted. And couldn't a staffer have mismanaged this without Mr. Jordan's knowledge? It's possible, Mitchell said, but the personal benefits suggest he was involved. Grayson smiled faintly at the jury. Suggest, not confirm. No proof, Mr. Jordan authorized these. Not directly in these records, Mitchell replied. No further questions, Grayson said, sowing doubt as he sat. Next, Ellis called Tom Reynolds, a former Jordan aide turned whistleblower. Reynolds, a wiry man in his 30s with a nervous tic, took the stand, his hands fidgeting as he swore in. Mr. Reynolds, Ellis asked, what did you witness working for Mr. Jordan? Reynolds cleared his throat, his voice shaky but resolute. I was his deputy campaign manager in 2023. I heard him tell an associate, pay them off through Buckeye shut them up. He said it'd kill the investigation. The room buzzed. Ellis leaned in. He knew it was to obstruct justice? Yes, Reynolds said, his voice firming. He told me later, they'll never tie it to me. Grayson pounced during cross-examination. Mr. Reynolds, you were fired, weren't you? Yes, he admitted, flushing. For poor performance? For pushing back on dirty money, he countered. So this is revenge? Grayson asked, turning to the jury. No, it's the truth, Reynolds insisted, his eyes flashing. As the first day closed, the jury sat divided. Ellis's evidence was strong, but Grayson's doubts lingered. Jordan maintained his scowl, but the cracks were forming, setting the stage for Judge Simmons's question to shake him to his core. The second day of Jim Jordan's trial dawned with a chill wind sweeping through Columbus, Ohio. But inside room 4 of the federal courthouse, the atmosphere burned with a restless intensity. The gallery was a packed, crucible reporters crowded the edges, their laptops a relentless hum as they fueled a growing national spectacle. Spectators sat shoulder to shoulder, their whispers a low buzz beneath the creak of the wooden benches. Prosecutor Karen Ellis stood at her table, her wiry frame taut with purpose, her dark eyes sharp with determination as she prepared to tighten the screws with a trio of witnesses whose testimonies could unravel Jordan's defense. First to take the stand was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the forensic accountant whose meticulous work had already stirred unease. She settled into the witness chair, her tight bun framing a face calm but resolute, her binder of financial records open before her. Dr. Mitchell, Ellis began, holding up a highlighted bank statement. You've traced $3.5 million from Jordan's campaign to Buckeye Freedom Fund. Can you elaborate on what that money funded? Mitchell adjusted her glasses, her voice steady and precise. The funds were transferred over 8 months in 2023, labeled as consulting services. Buckeye Freedom Fund then redirected them. $2 million went to cash payments for 3 individuals linked to a 2023 investigation into Jordan's conduct essentially hush money. Another $1 million covered personal expenses, private flights, a lake house lease in Lake Erie, luxury purchases all tied to Jordan and his close associates. The gallery buzzed, a ripple of shock spreading through the crowd. Ellis pressed further. In your expert opinion, could this be an oversight? No, Mitchell said firmly. The transactions were structured to evade detection, split into smaller increments, funneled through a shell company with no verifiable operations. It's deliberate, not accidental. Michael Grayson, Jordan's defense attorney, rose for cross-examination, his tone smooth but edged with skepticism. Dr. Mitchell, you're assuming intent. Couldn't a campaign staffer have arranged this without Mr. Jordan's knowledge? It's possible, Mitchell admitted, but the personal benefits, his flights, his lake house suggest he was involved. Grayson offered the jury a faint smile. Suggest, not prove. No evidence, Mr. Jordan personally authorized these. Not directly in these records, Mitchell conceded. No further questions, Grayson said, planting a seed of doubt as he returned to his seat. Next, Ellis called Tom Reynolds, the former aide whose insider account had hinted at Jordan's complicity. Reynolds took the stand, his wiry frame tense, his nervous tika twitch in his jaw more pronounced under the courtroom lights. Mr. Reynolds, Ellis asked, you witnessed Mr. Jordan discuss Buckeye Freedom Fund. What did he say? Reynolds swallowed hard, his voice shaky but gaining strength. It was June 2023 in his D.C. office. I heard him tell an associate, pay them off through Buckeye, shut them up. Later, he told me, this kills the investigation, Thiel, never tie it to me. The room hummed with tension. Ellis leaned in. Did he indicate he knew it was to obstruct justice? Yes, Reynolds said, his voice firming. He said, they'll never prove it, like he'd planned it all. Gasps punctuated the air. Ellis nodded. No further questions. Grayson stood, his eyes narrowing. Mr. Reynolds, you were fired from Jordan's team, weren't you? Yes, he admitted, his cheeks flushing. For poor performance? For questioning the money, he countered, his voice rising. So this is personal, Grayson said, turning to the jury. A disgruntled ex-aide with a grudge? I'm here for the truth, Reynolds insisted, his gaze steady. Grayson sat, leaving the jury to weigh his credibility. Ellis had one more witness to unleash, Laura Bennett, a late addition whose name sent a jolt through the room. Bennett, a former Buckeye Freedom Fund consultant, stepped forward, a woman in her late 30s with a composed demeanor masking visible nerves. MS. Bennett, Ellis began gently. Why are you testifying today? Bennett took a deep breath, her voice steady but tinged with regret. I set up Buckeye Freedom Fund for Jordan. He told me to move the money, said it was to neutralize threats. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The room stilled. What threats? Ellis pressed. In May 2023, he met me in Columbus, Bennett said. He said, $3.5 million through Buckeye keeps the critics quiet and the feds off my back. He wanted it hidden. A stunned silence fell. Ellis held up a small recorder. Do you have proof? Yes, Bennett said, nodding. I taped a call with him. I kept it as insurance. Grayson shot up. Objection. This recording's legality is questionable. Judge Simmons's voice rumbled through. Overruled. Play it, MS. Ellis. Ellis pressed play, and Jordan's voice echoed. Push $3.5 million through Buckeye keeps the critics quiet and the feds off my back. Make it clean. Bennett's voice followed. That's risky, Jim. Jordan snapped. Risk is how we win, just do it. Chaos erupted. Reporters typed furiously. Spectators gasped. And Jordan's scowl faltered, his hands gripping the table as his sharp eyes widened. Ellis faced the jury. No further questions. Grayson tried to discredit Bennett, questioning her motives and the recording's authenticity. But the jury's eyes lingered on Jordan, whose composure was cracking. As Bennett stepped down, the trial's tide had turned, setting the stage for Simmons's shattering question. The third day opened with room 4 simmering with anticipation. Laura Bennett's recording had shifted the trial's momentum, and now Jim Jordan would take the stand to reclaim his narrative. Michael Grayson had spent the night coaching him, crafting a defense rooted in his reputation as a fierce fighter. As Jordan rose, the courtroom hushed, every eye on the congressman. He strode to the witness box, his navy suit sharp, his thinning gray hair combed neatly. He swore the oath and sat, his hands clasped, projecting the combative scowl that had defined his career. Grayson approached, his tone warm and confident. Mr. Jordan, did you knowingly misuse campaign funds or obstruct justice? No, Jordan said, his voice firm, meeting the jury's gaze. I fought for Ohio for nearly 20 years against the swamp, against the left. I trusted my team to handle finances and strategy. I didn't break any laws. What about the recording? Grayson prompted. It's twisted, Jordan replied smoothly. I was talking about silencing political attacks, legal campaign moves. Quiet meant strategy, not corruption. You deny all wrongdoing? Absolutely, he said, his scowl deepening. This is a witch hunt by people who can't beat me fair and square. Grayson nodded, satisfied, and sat. Karen Ellis rose, her eyes sharp with intent, clutching a folder of emails and transcripts. Mr. Jordan, she began, you say you trusted your team. But here's an email you sent. Buckeye handles the payments, keep it clean. Explain that. Jordan shrugged, his scowl holding. I meant clean in terms of optics bubble perception, not hiding anything. Ellis arched a brow. Really? Another email. Feds are closed, pay them now. That's you ordering a cover-up, isn't it? No, Jordan said, his voice tightening. It was about settling debts, not obstructing. Ellis held up the recording transcript. You said, $3.5 million keeps the feds off my back. That's obstruction, not optics. I misspoke, Jordan said, his scowl faltering. I meant keeping the campaign safe from harassment. Misspoke. Ellis pressed. Your consultant warned it was risky, and you said, risk is how we win. That's not trust, that's a plan. I relied on my team, Jordan insisted, his tone rising. To break the law, Ellis shot back, producing a lease agreement. A lake house for your family, paid by Buckeye. You didn't know? It's not mine, Jordan snapped. I don't control that lease. But you stayed there, Ellis said, turning to the jury. Fighting for Ohio doesn't explain this. Grayson objected speculation, and Simmons sustained it, but the jury's faces showed doubt creeping in. Ellis kept the pressure on, dismantling Jordan's story piece by piece. By the end, he stepped down, his scowl shaken, sweat beading on his brow. The room buzzed with whispers, and Judge Simmons watched, his brown eyes hinting at the question that would leave Jordan trembling. The fourth day of Jim Jordan's trial arrived with room for the Columbus Federal Courthouse, steeped in a tension so thick it seemed to press against the granite walls. A chill March wind rattled the windows outside, but inside, the atmosphere burned with anticipation. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Reporters spilled into every corner, their laptops a relentless symphony of clicks as they fed live updates to a nation on edge. Spectators sat shoulder to shoulder, their murmurs a low roar beneath the creak of the wooden benches. Prosecutor Karen Ellis stood at her table, her wiry frame radiating a fierce resolve, her dark eyes gleaming with the certainty of a predator closing in. The previous day's testimony had rocked the courtroom, but what came next would tip the scales beyond repair. Ellis rose, her voice slicing through the charged silence like a blade. The prosecution calls Laura Bennett to the stand. A wave of shock rippled through the room as Laura Bennett stepped forward, a woman in her late 30s. Her dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail, her tailored suit unable to mask the nervous tremor in her hands. As a former consultant for Buckeye Freedom Fund, Bennett had been a peripheral figure in the case until this moment. She took the stand, her composed demeanor cracking slightly as her eyes darted toward Jordan, who sat at the defense table, his scowl deepening as he gripped the table's edge. "Ms. Bennett," Ellis began, her tone steady but probing. "What was your role at Buckeye Freedom Fund?" "I was a financial consultant," Bennett replied, her voice clear but tinged with unease. "I set up and managed the fund's accounts at Mr. Jordan's direction." "And did that include dealings with Congressman Jim Jordan?" Bennett nodded, her gaze dropping briefly. "Yes. In May 2023, I met with him in Columbus. He told me to move $3.5 million through Buckeye Freedom Fund to neutralize threats." His words. He said it would keep critics quiet and the feds off his back. The courtroom stilled, every breath suspended. Ellis pressed on. "Did he know this was to obstruct justice?" "He made it clear," Bennett said, her voice trembling slightly. "He said, 'No one needs to trace this, it's how we stay ahead.' It wasn't about campaign support, it was about silencing people." Gasps broke the silence, a low hum of shock spreading through the crowd. Ellis held up a small black recorder, its presence sending a jolt through the room. "Do you have evidence of this?" "Yes," Bennett said, her voice steadying. "I recorded a phone call with Jordan. I kept it as protection in case he turned on me." Michael Grayson, Jordan's defense attorney, shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This recording's admissibility is dubious privacy laws and chain of custody concerns." Judge Robert Simmons leaned forward, his steady brown eyes narrowing as his deep voice rumbled through the room. "I'll rule on that, Mr. Grayson." "Overruled. Play it, Ms. Ellis." Ellis plugged the drive into a speaker system, and the room plunged into a deathly hush. Jordan's voice crackled through, sharp and unmistakable. "Push $3.5 million through Buckeye keeps the critics quiet and the feds off my back. Make it clean." Bennett's voice followed, cautious. "That's risky, Jim." Jordan snapped, his tone brash. "Risk is how we win, just do it." Chaos erupted. Reporters typed furiously, their fingers a blur, while spectators gasped and whispered in disbelief. Jordan's scowl vanished, his face paling as his hands gripped the table, knuckles whitening. His sharp eyes darted to Grayson, who whispered urgently, but Jordan seemed frozen, his breath shallow and rapid as the weight of his own words crashed down. Ellis turned to the jury, her voice rising over the din. "This isn't hearsay or speculation. This is Jim Jordan, on tape, ordering a conspiracy to misuse funds and obstruct justice. No further questions." Grayson stood for cross-examination, his slick facade fraying at the edges. "Ms. Bennett, you're facing your own legal scrutiny, aren't you? This is a plea deal to save yourself, isn't it?" "I came forward voluntarily," Bennett countered, her voice firming. "I don't expect leniency, just the truth." "You could have doctored this recording," Grayson pressed. "Why should we trust you?" "It's unedited," Bennett said. "I've got the original file, time-stamped and verified." Grayson hammered at Bennett's credibility, her past consulting fees, her motives, but the jury's eyes remained fixed on Jordan, whose pale face and trembling hand betrayed more than any rebuttal could. As Bennett stepped down, the trial's momentum had shifted decisively, the recording a damning blow that left Jordan's defense in tatters. Judge Simmons watched, his salt and pepper hair catching the light, his silence a storm poised to strike. The fifth day of the trial arrived with room 4 simmering in a tension so palpable it felt like the gray Columbus sky had seeped inside. Laura Bennett's recording had turned the case on its head, and the defense countered with a parade of character witnesses, local pastors, loyal constituents who vouched for Jordan's integrity. But the jury's faces showed growing skepticism, their trust eroded by the congressman's own voice on tape. Then, in a move that sent a jolt through the room, Judge Robert Simmons took command. "Mr. Jordan," he said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder, "I'll question you myself." A hush fell as Jordan rose, his movements slow and unsteady, his navy suit suddenly seeming too tight for his wiry frame. He returned to the witness stand, his thinning gray hair combed but his pale face glistening with sweat, his hands clasped tightly as he faced Simmons, whose steady brown eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made the room shrink. "Mr. Jordan," Simmons began, his tone measured but edged with steel, "you've testified under oath that you had no knowledge of these payments through Buckeye Freedom Fund, that it was all your team's doing. But we've heard your voice on that recording. $3.5 million keeps the feds off my back. Tell me, Congressman, if you didn't know about this scheme, why did you personally order it?" The courtroom froze, the question hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. Jordan's pale face drained further, his breath catching as his sharp eyes widened in panic. His hands gripped the stand, trembling violently, his wiry frame shaking in his seat as the jury leaned forward, riveted. Simmons's brown eyes bored into him, unrelenting, the weight of that single question dismantling his defense in an instant. Jordan opened his mouth, then closed it, the silence stretching as sweat beaded on his brow. Finally, he spoke, his voice a hoarse rasp. "Your Honor, I didn't order anything illegal. That recording gets out of context. I meant keeping the campaign safe, not obstructing justice. It was a figure of speech." Simmons's eyes flashed, his voice rising with a mix of incredulity and authority. "A figure of speech? You said, make it clean, risk is how we win. That's not a metaphor, that's a directive. You swore under oath you didn't know, yet here you are, on tape, giving orders. Which is it, Mr. Jordan? Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" The room erupted gasps, shouts, and a frantic scribbling of reporters as the courtroom surged into chaos. Jordan's face turned ashen, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he gripped the stand, his breath hitching in his chest. "I didn't mean it like that," he stammered, his voice breaking. "It was just politics, how we fight back." The gallery exploded with noise. Spectators cried out, "He's lying," while others shouted, "Give him a chance." Grayson leapt up, "Objection! He's badgering the witness," but Simmons waved him off with a curt, "Overruled." "He's answered." Simmons's voice boomed over the tumult, his words a hammer striking stone. "Just politics? You conspired to bury $3.5 million and obstruct justice, then lied about it under oath. That's not fighting, it's cheating. And you're shaking hands, tell me you know it." The courtroom surged again, reporters bolted for the exits, their shouts of Jordan's toast echoing as they raced to file stories. Spectators stood, some cheering, others jeering, while the jury gaped, stunned by Simmons's question and Jordan's trembling collapse. Jordan sank back into the stand, his pale, shaking form a shadow of the combative figure he'd once been, his stammered excuse, just politics, ringing hollow as the chaos spilled beyond the walls. "Step down," Simmons ordered, his tone final, his brown eyes blazing with resolve. Jordan stumbled back to his seat, his legs unsteady, his hands still trembling as he sank into the chair, the weight of Simmons's question leaving him visibly shaken. The room buzzed with frenetic energy, the eruption a testament to the moment Judge Simmons asked the question that left Jim Jordan shaking in his seat, his defense in ruins. The sixth day of Jim Jordan's trial arrived with room for the Columbus Federal Courthouse, shrouded in silence, so dense it felt like the gray March sky had settled inside. The gallery was packed to overflowing, reporters jammed every corner, their laptops a relentless chorus of clicks as they awaited the fallout of Judge Simmons's devastating question. Spectators sat rigid, their whispers a faint hum beneath the creak of the wooden benches. At the defense table, Jim Jordan slumped in his chair, his navy suit rumpled, his thinning gray hair disheveled, a stark contrast to the fiery figure he'd cut days earlier. His pale face, still shaken from Simmons's unmasking, bore the weight of a man whose combative spirit had been broken. Michael Grayson, his attorney, sat beside him, his slick demeanor replaced by a grim resignation as he scribbled notes that seemed futile. The double doors creaked open, and the jury filed in, their faces weary but resolute after 7 grueling hours of deliberation. Judge Robert Simmons entered moments later, his black robe a stark silhouette against his salt and pepper hair, his steady brown eyes sweeping the room with an authority that silenced every murmur. He took his seat, adjusting a stack of files with a steady hand, his deep voice rumbling through the stillness. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked, his tone measured but carrying the weight of finality. The foreman, a stocky man in his 50s with a factory worker's calloused hands, stood. "We have, Your Honor." "Proceed," Simmons said, his posture unyielding, his gaze fixed on the jury. The foreman unfolded a slip of paper, his voice steady but heavy with gravity. "On the charge of conspiracy to misuse campaign funds and obstruction of justice, we find a defendant, Jim Jordan, guilty." A collective gasp tore through the courtroom, followed by a surge of noise, reporters typing furiously, spectators murmuring in disbelief. Jordan's pale face crumpled, his hands clenching the table as his wiry frame shook visibly, the verdict a final blow to his already shattered defenses. His sharp eyes widened, then dropped to the floor, his breath hitching as a tremor ran through his body, the shaking from Simmons's question lingering like an aftershock. Simmons raised his gavel, his voice booming over the chaos. "Order," he commanded, the sharp crack of wood on wood restoring silence. "Mr. Jordan, do you have anything to say before sentencing?" The gallery held its breath, every eye turning to Jordan. He rose slowly, his movements unsteady, his suit hanging loose on a frame that seemed diminished. He faced Simmons, his pale face glistening with sweat, his hands trembling as he opened his mouth to speak. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, as all awaited his response, a plea, a defense, or perhaps a defiant stand from the man who'd once dominated congressional debates. Instead, in a voice so soft it barely reached the back row, he whispered, "I didn't mean to break the law. It was just politics how we fight. I thought we could win." His head bowed, his hands fell to his sides, and he sank back into his chair, the excuse just politics hanging in the air like a frail thread snapping under scrutiny. The courtroom erupted again, reporters shouted questions, spectators gasped and jeered, and even the jury exchanged incredulous glances. Karen Ellis sat back, her intense eyes glinting with triumph, while Grayson stared at Jordan, his composure fracturing as he muttered, "Jim, that's not enough." Jordan's pale face drained further, his eyes glassy as he stared at the table, his trembling hands betraying the weight of his words. Simmons's brown eyes blazed, his voice rising like a thunderclap over the tumult. "Just politics? You conspired to misuse $3.5 million and obstruct justice, then swore under oath you knew nothing. That's not fighting against cheating, and your shaking now proves you knew it was wrong." The room surged with noise, spectators cried out, "He's finished," while others shouted, "Give him a chance." Grayson leapt up, "Objection! He's prejudicing the court," but Simmons waved him off with a curt, "Overruled." He said his piece. "Court is adjourned," Simmons declared, his gavel falling with a sharp crack. "Sentencing will follow in 2 weeks." He rose and exited, leaving the courtroom in a frenzy as Jordan remained seated, his pale, trembling form a shadow of the combative figure he'd once been. Reporters bolted for the exits, their shouts of "guilty" echoing as they raced to file stories, while the gallery buzzed with a chaotic mix of shock and vindication. Simmons's question had left Jordan shaking, and the verdict sealed his fate in the eyes of all who witnessed it. In the days that followed, the Columbus Federal Courthouse returned to its quiet rhythm, but the echoes of Jim Jordan's trial reverberated far beyond its granite walls. News vans lingered outside, their cameras capturing every angle of the building that had become a crucible of political reckoning. While inside Room 4, the air still seemed to carry the tremor of Jordan's whispered excuse, just politics, and Judge Simmons's unrelenting strike. The congressman's conviction, sparked by that single, shattering question, had transformed the trial into a national lightning rod, a moment carved into the annals of Ohio's political history. Headlines screamed across every outlet. "Jordan guilty after judge's question leaves him shaking." The hashtag Jordan verdict trended globally within hours, igniting a firestorm of reaction online. Cable news panels dissected the trial late into the night, pundits clashing over Jordan's downfall. Some mourned the loss of a conservative warrior, calling his excuse a tragic lapse in a career of fierce advocacy. Others hailed it as a victory for justice, a crack in the armor of political impunity exposed by Simmons's piercing clarity. On X, opinions collided. "He fought for us, give him grace," one user posted, while another retorted, "Shaking like a coward, jail him." The secondary players navigated their own fallout. Tom Reynolds, the ex-aide whose testimony had cracked Jordan's story, retreated to a quiet Columbus suburb, dodging the press. "I didn't want him ruined," he told a local reporter, "but he forced my hand." Laura Bennett, the consultant whose recording had turned the tide, vanished from public view, rumored to be negotiating a deal or seeking solitude. Michael Grayson issued a terse statement. "Mr. Jordan accepts the verdict and will prepare for sentencing." But his clipped tone betrayed frustration with a client whose shaking collapse had undone months of legal strategy. Judge Robert Simmons returned to his chambers, his calm resolve unchanged. His question, "If you didn't know, why did you order it?" became a rallying cry for accountability advocates, cementing his legacy as a judicial titan who'd felled a giant with a single, unanswerable blow. Colleagues whispered that the Jordan case would define his tenure, a testament to his ability to unearth truth, though some critics accused him of grandstanding. Simmons remained silent, letting the verdict and Jordan's trembling reaction speak for itself. The broader impact unfolded like a seismic shift. Jordan's conviction triggered audits of campaign finances across Congress, with Buckeye Freedom Fund becoming a symbol of hidden corruption. His once loyal base splintered. Some clung to his image as a fighter undone by a misstep. Others abandoned him, eager to escape the scandal stain. The Lake House lease, the cash payments, and the $3.5 million scheme were dissected in exposés and late-night monologues, turning Jordan from a congressional powerhouse into a cautionary tale of arrogance and deceit. Jordan himself withdrew from the public eye. Rumors swirled off a retreat to his Ohio home, of late-night calls to family, of a life stripped of the influence that had once fueled him. No fiery speeches, no press conferences, just silence. His excuse, delivered in that breathless courtroom moment after Simmons's question, marked the end of a career that had thrived on relentless combat, now reduced to a trembling whisper of just politics that no one bought. A week later, outside the courthouse, a lone protester held a sign. "Simmons, 1, corruption, 0. Nearby, a young reporter named Emily Hayes, who'd covered the trial for a local outlet, filed her final story. "Judge Simmons didn't just ask a question," she wrote. "He exposed a lie we all suspected. Jordan's shaking collapse, raw and undeniable, left us all questioning the cost of power unchecked." The story closed with a nation captivated, a courtroom emptied, and a legacy reshaped. Jordan's fall, sparked by Simmons's unerring question and cemented by his own trembling reaction, had not only ended the trial but carved a new chapter in Ohio and American politics, a tale of justice, collapse, and the power of truth laid bare.